Hello, today I'll be ranking all of the books that I read in this past month from best to worst. So we'll start out with my favorite book, and it is this. Well, not actually this. This is the Tolkien Reader, which is a collection of just a whole bunch of Tolkien's shorter works. Like, it has some poems by him, it has some short stories by him. And what I read out of it was Leaf by Niggle and On Fairy Stories. On Fairy Stories is Tolkien's essay about fairy stories, fairy tales, what actually is a fairy tale, how good fairy tales are written and how bad fairy tales are written, and what actually a fairy tale is. And I loved On Fairy Stories. Reading it, like, the entire time I was reading it, I was nodding along thinking, yes, that's a very good point. So On Fairy Stories is just an amazing essay, the best essay I've ever read. Not that I've actually read a lot. I've probably written more essays than I've actually read. But yeah, Tolkien is my favorite author, and he knew what he was talking about. He knew what fairy stories were, he knew what fantasy was, and he knew what it means to write a good story, and he knew what stories were truly about. And Leaf by Niggle is his short story about a man called Niggle who is painting an enormous painting of this giant tree, and he's like sacrificing his entire life to creating this tree, and he feels like everything else he does is just a waste of time. And Leaf by Niggle is just such an amazing short story. It's the shortest story Tolkien ever wrote, actually, and it's a very good one as well. It's so good. I highly recommend it. Of course, Tolkien is an amazing writer. I recommend everything that he's written. And this is 10 out of 10, of course. The next one that I read is The Lost Legend by S.D. Smith. This is one of his Green Ember books. This is book 2 in the Lost Tales series. Book 1 was The Lost Key. Book 2 is this one, The Lost Legend. And this book actually came out last month. I pre-ordered it on the author's website, and I got it like a week before it was actually released. So I got to read it like before the book was technically even released. And I love the Green Ember series. I've loved it for years, and there's a whole bunch of side series as well. There's like the Helmer series, there's the Old Natalia series, there's the main series, of course, there's the Archer series. There's a lot of side series of the Green Ember. And so far, the Green Ember has yet to disappoint. I have always loved the Green Ember for years, since I was a lot younger, and that hasn't changed since. This book was so well structured. I loved the characters. The ending had a very shocking plot twist. And yeah, I can't wait for the last book in the Lost Tales series. The last book is going to be called The Lost Cause. And I just love the Green Ember because they are books that feel old, like, even though they were written nowadays, like this one was just published last month, even though they are books that were written in modern times, they feel like something much, much older. That's one of the things that I love about them so much. I love this entire series, and this one is no different, especially the characters. I have a theory that Marlin is going to be the one to write the Picket Pack Slayer song from the third book of the main Green Ember series. But yeah, I love this book. 10 out of 10, of course. And then the next one is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Now, I already reviewed this book along with 2 others in the video that I uploaded just a week prior to this one, so you can watch that if you want my full thoughts on it. But just to put it shortly, I loved Brave New World. I thought it was a very, very good book. It had very good messages. It had an amazing ending. I'm giving it 9 out of 10. And then, this next one is a reread, and it is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I'm a big fan of H.G. Wells' books, and I've read a lot of them. The War of the Worlds was actually the first of H.G. Wells' books that I read. I read part of The Time Machine, but then DNF'd it, and then I read this immediately afterwards and really liked it. Although, I will say, so this book, first of all, is just amazing. It has very powerful and good themes, very deep themes and messages are found within this book. Also, this was, I think, the very first alien invasion story ever written, and this is the book that really started alien apocalypse stories. And I really love The War of the Worlds. It is so, so good. It was published in 1898, and it is what inspired basically every single alien apocalypse story you'll ever read or watch. And The War of the Worlds is really good, although the first time I read it, I found the ending to be very, very disappointing. It's still a satisfactory ending, and it cleans up all the loose strings, although I felt like it did it way too easily and abruptly. And so I don't want to give away any spoilers, but I might have to. So quickly, there's going to be some spoilers, big spoilers for the end of The War of the Worlds. If you haven't read The War of the Worlds yet, and you want to, and you don't want to get spoiled for it, then you can skip to this time in the video. So, if you've read The War of the Worlds, here's the big spoiler for the last part. The aliens, the Martians from Mars, all die because of the chemicals and pollution on Earth. They just all of a sudden die, and all of them are wiped out, and that's pretty much how the story ends. And while this ending makes sense, and it is a satisfactory ending, it is a good and happy ending, I feel like it takes away a lot of the tension earlier on in the book. Because basically the entire book, building up towards this part, is them fighting against the Martians. The military service is going against them, but they're being absolutely destroyed because the Martians have really advanced technology, and just mankind is fighting for survival, and they're trying to think up of some weapon they can make that they can defeat the Martians with. But then, all the Martians abruptly just die because of chemicals. And while this makes sense, it takes away all of the tension, and it kind of makes you think like, so that was all for nothing? All that fighting was for nothing? All those people who died, all of the thinking and planning, trying to defeat the Martians, the main character starving half to death inside a ruined building, they all fought for nothing because the Martians just all of a sudden died because of chemicals? So, yeah, I did not like the ending as much. Although I will say the second time reading this, I found the ending to be a lot better than I remembered. So still, this is a very good book. It doesn't have the greatest ending. I did enjoy the ending a lot more than I did when I first read it, though. And so I'm giving this, I think, 9 out of 10 as well. The next one is actually a non-fiction book, and it is Exploring Creation with Astronomy by Jeannie Fulbright. I love all of Jeannie Fulbright's books. She's written a ton of books on various scientific subjects, like she's written some on sea creatures, she's written some on creatures that fly, so like birds, bugs, and I think Jeannie Fulbright is just a great writer. I love all of her books, and Exploring Creation with Astronomy was no different. I've always found astronomy to be very fascinating, and this book was no different. It was so fascinating. I really love reading about astronomy, and I'm giving this one 9 out of 10 as well. I really enjoyed it. The next one, now we're getting into books that I didn't like as much, but that were still pretty okay. The next one is another H.G. Wells book. It is The Sleeper Awakes. Now, unlike The War of the Worlds, this one isn't a reread. I read this one for the very first time, and I will say this is a very interesting H.G. Wells book because it feels a lot more modern in a way than most of his other books do. Like The War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, First Man in the Moon, and all of his other books that I've read feel very old-fashioned, just like in the way that they're written. But this one feels almost like a modern thriller, like something that could be written nowadays, even though this was first published in 1899. It feels very much like a modern story. It's very fast-paced. And this has to be maybe my least favorite H.G. Wells book yet. I still did enjoy it. It was a pretty good book. And it has a really fascinating premise as well. The premise of the story is that a man called Graham falls asleep, and then he's basically in a coma for like 200 years. So then he wakes up 200 years in the future, and he's like inside a glass case in a museum, and he's famous because he's been sleeping for centuries. This book starts out so good and so fascinating, but it sort of goes downhill from there. It's still a pretty enjoyable story overall, but it's not H.G. Wells' best work. He could have done so much more with this story, with this idea of his, and the story just went off in a vague direction that I wasn't expecting. Another thing was the descriptions of things and places. Usually with H.G. Wells' descriptions of things, I feel like they're very vivid. They paint a very clear picture in my mind of what is happening. But with this one, I feel like the descriptions weren't as good, and I still only have a vague idea of how to picture the places and events in this book. So I feel like, and he talks about in the introduction, H.G. Wells talks about how this book was very rushed. He had to write it very quickly under pressure from his deadline, and you can definitely tell. It feels like a very rushed storyline with not as much thought put into it. It doesn't have a very great ending as well. So overall, still a pretty good and enjoyable book, but it has to be probably my least favorite of H.G. Wells' books that I've read so far. And I'm giving this one 7 out of 10. The next one isn't really a full-sized book. It is more of like a novella, sort of. And it is this. Not actually this, just one of the stories in this. This is a collection of stories by Edgar Allan Poe. And the particular story that I read out of this one was called The Mystery of Marie Roget. And I love Edgar Allan Poe's writings. Almost all the stuff I've read from him has been fantastic. And so The Mystery of Marie Roget was very interesting, but I didn't like it as much as I usually enjoy Edgar Allan Poe. It's the mystery about a young woman called Marie Roget who is found, just all of a sudden one day found dead in a river, and they start investigating as to who killed her, why they killed her, and how they killed her. And it's really fascinating to see the progress of how the one character, Dupin, who is a detective, how he sort of uncovers some clues. Really fascinating to see his thought process as he forms a hypothesis about what happened to Marie Roget. And so it's very interesting. The entire story was so good, and I was really enjoying it. It was so good. Until the ending. This is the strangest murder mystery I've ever read, because in the ending, the mystery is never actually solved, and they leave you hanging. And now I'm going to be wondering the rest of my life who actually murdered Marie Roget, why they did it, how they did it. It's just, yeah, it was very good, but just the fact that the mystery is never actually solved left me very disappointed, because I thought there was going to be like a big reveal at the end, but there wasn't. The mystery is just left unsolved for all of eternity. So I'm giving this one 6.5 out of 10. Now, I don't own a copy of the final book because I read the ebook of it, but it is called The Stolen Bacillus and Other Incidents. Is it Bacillus or Bacillus or Bacillus? I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that. But this is not a novel. It's by H.G. Wells. This is not a novel. It's a collection of short stories. And these are H.G. Wells' earliest stories. All of these were written before he really fully became a writer. All these short stories were written before he ever wrote what he became known for. Before he wrote The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, The First Men in the Moon, The Invisible Man, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Basically before he wrote anything else. These are H.G. Wells' earliest works, and I have to say I didn't enjoy them as much as I usually enjoy H.G. Wells. Most of his books are fantastic. The First Men in the Moon is my favorite. But his earliest stories, I feel like, are not near as good as his later ones. And I feel like with The Stolen Bacillus and Other Incidents, he was still trying to find his voice as a writer. And so I didn't really enjoy any of these stories as much. Some were pretty good, most were kind of okay. So I feel like H.G. Wells is still a good writer. But The Stolen Bacillus and Other Incidents was written before he really found his voice in writing. So that is every single book I read in this past month, ranked from best to worst. Thank you so much for watching this video, and for now, farewell.